Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for tuning in to another edition of the All Cardinals podcast. My name is Donnie, Druin, joined every week by my main man, Richie Bradshaw. Before we get into everything, talking is hard already. Go to follow our work at allcardinals.com or slide.com/NFL/Cardinals. Follow Richie on Twitter at RichieBrads36 with a Z. Follow me on Twitter at Donnie Druin with an IE. Richie, really quick before we get into football, we are about 45 minutes away from the D-backs game 3 back here at Chase Field, hoping to just steal a game, get ourselves back in the series. Go Snakes.
Donnie, I just have one question for you. Was it over when the Germans bombed Pearl Harbor?
I don't think so.
Hell no, and it ain't over now. I say, let's get them. Meanwhile, people are going to be in the comments like, Germans. Forget it, he's on a roll. Anyone gets that reference, I love you.
Yeah, is that an Animal House reference?
It is Animal House.
I've never seen the movie, but I've heard that quoted probably a billion times by you. So
by me, yeah. I was going to say nobody.
I feel like I should know by now. So hopefully the D-backs can get something going. If not, we do have the Arizona Cardinals, who have obviously been on a tear this season, 1-5 through 6 weeks of football. Have the Seattle Seahawks coming in week 7, but there's a bit of optimism around the facility as both Kyler Murray and Budda Baker were designated to return from their respective injury list. Budda Baker coming off injured reserve with a knee injury, and Kyler Murray coming off the PUP list with a knee injury too. Both players have a 21-day practice window before they have to be activated to the active roster or placed back on their respective list. I think for the remainder of the regular season, don't quote me on that. But nonetheless, I mean, both guys are practicing today. They were at practice yesterday. They were at practice today on Thursday. Budda Baker claimed himself as a game time decision heading to Seattle. It's unlikely Kyler Murray plays this week or maybe even next week as well. It just all depends on how he looks on the mental and the physical part. But I want to go through each of the two guys. Budda Baker, we'll start with him because he has played this year. Obviously, a night and day difference when you lose a guy like Budda Baker, both in terms of play and just a leadership aspect that he brings. What a big boost this will be for a Cardinals defense who has looked good this year.
Dude, he is so many things for you. He's a good player. He's a great leader, a vocal guy, rally the troops, leads by example, leads by his play. This is such a huge addition for your defense, whether it's this week or next week or whenever he gets back. And this is a Cardinals defense that has played above their talent level, and they've done a pretty good job for the most part this year of playing up to their competition. Adding in, it's been okay, Donnie, for what they were supposed to be.
Sure, but like even then, like you would figure a team with Jonathan Gannon and Nick Rallis with those guys and bringing over Kaiser White too, who has played really well on the individual level. I just expected a little bit more defensively. I know it's a rebuilding year, but Richie, when you looked at the numbers, they have not been great, my man. And I know the early season slate wasn't supposed to be good to begin with, but man, like the Cardinals have found themselves in plenty of games this year already, and for the most part, they've fallen apart defensively in the second half, which has not helped their case at all.
No, for sure. And I'm not trying to hype them up as like the best defense in the league. I simply think that things should have been a lot worse, regardless of who's calling the plays for this defense. And I think that they're playing with a lot of heart right now. And adding in somebody who has that same kind of passion and carries that persona is going to help. I'm not saying you're going to propel into the top half of the league, but you're going to play with a little more attitude. And you're going to play with a little more physicality with the addition of Budda Baker back, who is at worst a top 10 safety in football. So having him back into the folds is going to be very important for this defense.
Dude, I think when he's healthy, top 5. Right?
Agreed.
I mean, just the stuff he brings and the stuff he can do on the football field. That's aside from the locker room guy that he is. And I will give you credit because in week 1 when he did play, even though the Commanders are the Commanders, still a very, very good defensive display from the Cardinals, led by Budda Baker. Obviously, they've been without him the last 4 weeks as he's been on injured reserve. What a huge boost for this defense. Hopefully, he can kind of help spur something around just in terms of overall talent and overall play. Shifting over to Kyler Murray, though, maybe not the instant impact he will have as a guy like Budda Baker will. That's a big one. That's a big one because we've heard so much, Richie, over the last few months about whether or not he will play, how he will look whenever he does come back and play. I still think the future for him is 50-50 up in the air. I think the Cardinals absolutely needed to see him on the field before they could make a good decision on whether or not to bring him back moving forward. The good news is that Kyler is coming to an offense that is much different than Cliff Kingsbury's in a good way. He's coming to seemingly a regime that likes him and wants him. But I'm not sure, number one, when he's actually going to return. I'm not sure what he's going to look like when he comes back. And to be honest, Richie, knowing how people view Kyler Murray on a national level, and even a lot of the fan base here in Arizona, I don't know what to expect out of him whenever he first steps on the field because he's going to be playing his first action in almost a year since tearing his ACL and a meniscus. A lot of people forget that. New scheme, new offense, no DeAndre Hopkins. I mean, Zach Ertz is a shell of himself, but we'll get to that here in a little bit. If he doesn't have a first couple of games, man, the pressure is going to be right back on him.
It's such a interesting situation, right? Because you've got the new regime, you've got a new offense, you've got a change of weapons and a change of scenery to a certain extent, and you got a quarterback who's coming back from an ACL and meniscus tear. The expectations, it feels like, are pretty high. And I just don't know how fair that is. And whatever happens, it's like, what is a good baseline to go off of? If Kyler Murray ends the year with X amount of yards and X amount of touchdowns, and he plays 8 games, I don't know. Like, what exactly is your baseline for what you're going to consider successful and what you're going to consider a failure? I feel like that's going to vary depending on who you talk to for that. With Kyler Murray, we need to really take circumstance into account here. Like, I know there's occasionally situations where you just want to see it very black and white, but this is not one of those situations where it needs to be black and white. It needs to be a lot of gray. There needs to be understanding for what's going on. There needs to be understanding that you're just looking for growth. You're not necessarily looking for a certain statistic to stand out. You just want to know that Kyler's coming back, and if he sucks his first game, but he is good his last game of the season, that's a win. So I think that's the biggest thing, is just understanding that you need to have certain benchmarks for him, but you can't be asking for very unrealistic expectations. He's not throwing for 3,000 yards. He's not throwing for 30 touchdowns over the last handful of games. You just need to come to an understanding that no matter what the statistical output is, you want him to look progressively better as the year goes on, no matter how bad he starts, because he could come out and be terrible.
He could.
He could also come out and be great.
Yep.
You just need to look that by the end of the year, he's more comfortable, he's more confident, and he's just a better football player coming back from a major injury, especially for a quarterback that uses his legs as much as he does.
That is such a great point, and I love how you kind of touched on both sides of the coin there, because a lot of guys coming back from such a significant injury aren't themselves the first couple of games, right? It does take them a handful of weeks to exactly, and so I mean, who's to say Kyler doesn't look like himself on the latter half of the schedule, and the Cardinals are kind of just sitting there like, all right, well, we have a decision to make. And I mean, you even throw like where they're picking in the draft as like a potential deterrent on whether or not they move Kyler, because like the Houston Texans are not doing them any favors at all with them winning their games. And the Cardinals, although they've only won one game, have looked head and shoulders better than anybody would have thought this year.
Yep.
So many factors into play here. And I want to wrap this Kyler conversation up with this. There's been a lot of people talking about Kyler, mostly in a negative light. I want to take this back to Tuesday when the team cut Myjai Sanders off of the active roster. And that kind of got the alarm bells going in my head a little bit. And like, I'm not a smart person at all. You're one of the best friends. You know this for a fact. And then Jonathan Gannon, the Cardinals head coach, goes on 98.7 and drops tonight and tomorrow when talking about Kyler Murray. And then you're like, okay, well, something's happening. Obviously, I was at practice on Wednesday. There's practice footage of Kyler, and there's guys talk about Kyler on our YouTube channel. All Cardinals, go subscribe. Nice little drop hint right there. It was different. The energy in the building was different. The players and the coaches had just a different vibe to them in a good way. Obviously, having your franchise quarterback out there helps, but it just seemed like, okay, like we got our guy back. I know they're 1-5. They're at the bottom of the NFC West, the NFC, and the NFL standings. There was just such different aura and energy and light, however you want to describe it, for this team moving forward. Leaving Tempe yesterday, I got the sense that they know right now there's no work to be had that will pay off immediately, but the building blocks for the future and the things they can do to help them a little bit down the road are being laid right here and right now. And I think for a team that kind of gets a sense for where they're at, I think that can be really, really special.
It's going to be very energetic and empowering for excuse me, for the Cardinals to be able to get back such a massive piece of their franchise's identity with Kyler Murray. It's going to be, I won't say game changing, but I will say game changing for what he can do.
You can make the argument, right? Because Josh Dobbs has played up and down
Quality
his first few weeks. You can make an argument the Cardinals might have like a 500 or above record with Kyler Murray at the helm.
Dude, with the way that they're playing under Gannon, right? It's all about buying into a culture. And that's exactly what Jonathan Gannon is instilling here, is his culture, the way he's going to run this football team. And the guys are buying into it and they are interested in being a part of it. And you are seeing that on a week-to-week basis. That was probably my biggest point when I was talking about the defense was there's, from a talent standpoint, they do not have a lot of Pro Bowlers or All Pros. But yet you've got guys who are playing their hearts out and playing good football. Dennis Gardeck, Kazir White, they're playing good football right now. You bring back a Pro Bowl talent like Kyler Murray, that's the kind of momentum swing that you see to get this season back on track a little bit. Me and you were down on the Cardinals all year heading into this year. You know, top 5 pick, top 3 pick, number 1 pick.
Yeah.
That's where, and not just us, but a lot of people were on that boat. But like you said, you wonder if Kyler Murray had been available for the start of the year based on the way that they're playing, and you see those 1-score games. Are the Cardinals a 3-3 team? Are they a 4-2 team? How do those toss-ups go with the Giants, with the Commanders? Like, you wonder to yourself if this potentially could have been a different season if Kyler Murray was there. That's how remarkable the job has been done by Jonathan Gannon so far, and it makes you wonder what Kyler Murray's impact could possibly be for this team, even at the midway point in the year. Like, what happens if you win 5 games the rest of the year to add on to the one you have? You finish the year 6-11. That's pretty damn successful in my book, and a huge catalyst for that could be the return of Kyler Murray.
Yeah, I just want to point out the ideal scenario for Cardinals fans is that Kyler Murray comes back, plays really, really well, and establishes kind of like a momentum heading into 2024. I don't think any Cardinals fans should be actively rooting for them to tank or for them to finish with the number 1 pick. Obviously, the caveat with having the number 1 pick is you do have the option to take a guy like Caleb Williams, who is considered the next generational guy coming out of the draft, whether he actually pans out like that very, very far down the road. But if Kyler Murray can come back, can show you that he's not a shell of his former self, that maybe he comes back bigger, better, and stronger than the old Kyler Murray was, now you're cooking, because you have a lot of draft capital, you have a lot of salary cap space. And I'm not saying that the Cardinals can compete for a playoff spot next year, but you're pretty far along in the rebuild process than you were a year removed from Monty Ossenfort taking over. And I think that's really exciting.
You need to understand the process that they're going through. I'm going to echo what I just said. This is supposed to be a team that was going to be picking in the top 5, if not have the number 1 pick. And they're not playing that way. We've talked about this before. fans can want it all they want, but players and coaches are not interested in tanking. And this is exactly what we're seeing on the football field. This is not a Cardinals team that is interested or has the intent to be tanking. They're playing hard for 60 minutes. Got to tip your hat to it. Like, they have come out and played much better football than anybody had anticipated. Have to respect it.
Yeah, I don't think tanking is ever an option when players and coaches have their paychecks and their reputation on the line. That's just not something that's going to happen. Obviously, general managers in the offseason can make certain moves to maybe position themselves to enter a rebuild, similar to what Monty Austinfort did over the offseason. But you'll never convince me coaches and players are tanking. You also never convinced me, Richie, that the Cardinals should never be done wheeling and dealing, right? I mean, we've hammered home this point plenty this podcast of how they're in the beginning stages of a rebuild, and Monty Austinfort has done a pretty admirable job of saying, hey, if you're not part of the future plan, pack your bags and get out, right? So many names over the last few months since he's taken over have exited Arizona. Potentially a couple more could be on the way. The NFL's trade deadline is pulling up. I think 2 weeks away. October 31st is the last day they can do it. Deal or no deal, I just want to play this with you because two of the heaviest names we have seen in trade talks come from Arizona. Wide receiver Marquise Brown and tight end Zach Ertz. We can start with the boy Hollywood. I'll ask you this. Would you entertain a trade for Marquise?
I think you entertain a trade for almost everybody on the roster, right?
Okay.
When you talk about Kyler Murray as being a potential trade candidate, yes, Marquise Brown has to be a potential trade candidate. With that being said, I don't know if I'm 100% on Hollywood out the door. I think what we have to sit back and have a conversation about is the future of this team, because if they do end up having 2 picks in the top 20 or top 15 in a loaded wide receiver class, it may not be the smartest thing to pay a number 2 receiver at best when you could have a Marvin Harrison Jr., a Keon Coleman, Malik Neighbors, and Emeka Egbuka. Like, there's a lot of guys in the upcoming draft. So to me, this is where you have to really pay attention to what the future of this team is. So if somebody calls you about Marquise Brown and they say, hey, I'm going to offer you a 3rd round pick, you do that and you don't think twice about it. Someone offers you something any higher, then you don't even hesitate. You don't let them finish a sentence. But if somebody is coming out and saying, hey, we'll give you a 5th this year and 2 5ths. We'll give you a 5th this year and a 5th in 2025. I don't know if that's the value that I want, but he definitely has to be considered a candidate for the team. That's pretty much where I'm at with it, is pretty much everybody on this team is a candidate. With a guy like Marquise Brown, I feel like you have to find value that's going to match, because if you don't, you just saw Christian Kirk a couple of years ago end up get you a 3rd round compensatory pick. And Marquise Brown could very well find an equal kind of contract with a future team.
I am so happy you brought that up. I did a collaboration piece with Arrowhead Reports' Jordan Foote, because there's been some smoke about the Chiefs potentially going to get Marquise Brown as the trade deadline nears. And we were going back and forth, and I said, hey, you have to remember Marquise is a free agent heading to 2024. If I am Marquise and I am his agent, I'm looking at that Christian Kirk deal that Kirk got in the prior offseason, saying, hey, this is what I want. This is the baseline. I'm not asking for top receiver money, because I really can't stay healthy. I mean, Marquise Brown's been on the injury report seemingly ever since he got here, on top of his speeding tickets, but that's neither here nor there. He hasn't really produced. I know. We all speed here.
We all
he hasn't really produced as a wide receiver 1. Granted, there's been so many different factors that play into that, but I mean, when you looked at the numbers are numbers, right? And Jordan asked me, he's like, what do you think the Cardinals would ask for? And I'm like, well, start high, negotiate low, right? So I'm going to ask for a 2nd round pick. And then after a couple weeks of talks, I'm like, look, like, best I could do is a 3rd round pick. Here it is. I'll happily take that from the Cardinals. But you also need to consider, if you do plan on keeping Kyler Murray, Kyler's going to want his guy. And there is no other guy in that locker room like Marquise Brown, just in terms of compatibility. I mean, they played together at Oklahoma. They're best friends on and off the field. I feel like if you are committed to Kyler Murray, in a sense, you might have to be committed to Marquise Brown too. Now, I'm not saying you keep him and you pay him whatever he wants, because you do need to get him on a reasonable contract. But I think if you're going to keep Kyler here long term, the last thing you want to do is kind of reverse course with all of the goodwill you put in with Kyler and then trade away his best friend or let him walk in free agency when you probably could have signed him.
No, 100% agree. There's also that factor you have to take into it. And I know some people won't care for it, but it truly is an important thing to keep your franchise quarterback happy, especially when they're already on a contract. So if they are committed to Kyler, you should commit to making him a happy individual. Look at what, teams like the Bills have done, what the Ravens have done, what the Chiefs have done. They want to keep their quarterbacks happy when they've got them on those kind of contracts, because that's what's going to bring out the best play in them. Kyler Murray is going to be another guy that you want to be as happy as possible, because that's when he's going to play his best. That's when he's going to be committed and turn off Call of Duty at 10 o'clock at night instead of 2 a.m. in the morning.
Get out. Jeez, man. Get out of here. I do like
low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, I do like the prospect of having Marquise, Michael Wilson, and maybe even like Marvin Harrison Jr. and as a trio heading into next season. You also still have Rondell Moore under contract for another year next year too. I don't hate that receiving core.
No, it's actually a pretty good receiving core. Yeah. The big question is, how good is Marvin Harrison Jr. as the number 2 when Michael Wilson is wide receiver 1 for the team?
I absolutely love that. That's a whole different discussion we can get into a little bit later. Shifting the conversation to Zach Ertz, and I'm iffy on trading Marquise for a number of reasons, Richie, but I don't know how you feel about Zach Ertz at this point in time. For context, wow, talking is hard today. Trey McBride outsnapped Zach Ertz for the first time this year last week in the loss to the Los Angeles Rams. Zach Ertz has not played up to the Zach Ertz standard we are used to seeing. He's dropped a handful of pretty big catches this year thus far. I know Josh Dobbs has not done him any favors in terms of trying to find him, but Ertz's number has been called a handful of times, and he hasn't necessarily done his job and came down with the ball. He's an older guy. I mean, I'm for it. I think we are seeing the emergence of Trey McBride on a week-to-week basis. I have no problem with cutting ties to Zach Ertz and letting Trey be the guy moving forward. And if you don't like Trey McBride the rest of the year, you can go get another tight end.
Donnie, this is remember earlier I said, I don't know if I move Marquise for 2/5. I'll move Zach Ertz for a 2027 7th round pick.
Damn, really?
It's not an insult to Zach Ertz. Please don't misconstrue that.
You're giving him the Isaiah Simmons treatment.
Dude, he's an older guy. He's coming off an ACL. He has not played very good this year. His contract is not friendly.
That's fair.
You need to just be able to get him off, especially because I don't know what team is going to value him. So if any team calls you and says, we'll give you a conditional 7th round pick, you take it. You simply just need to get any value you can, because you need to get younger, you need to get cheaper, and you need to start stocking up picks however you can. So if someone offers you anything for Zach Ertz, you need to do it, because quite frankly, I haven't looked at his contract, but this is a cut candidate in my opinion. He truly, truly is.
And yeah, you still have guys like, not that Jeff Swaim is like
Jeff Swaim
a game changer. No, that is not. I think Jeff Swaim was kind of an underrated signing whenever they got him in training camp. You have Swaim, you have McBride. There's worse tight end rooms in the NFL. And like you said, if we're going to call a spade, the Cardinals are 1-5. I mean, they're not going to make a push this season. It's hard for me to have the Cardinals say no to a trade for Zach Ertz that almost involves anything. It feels like a 7th round pick is a little low. Maybe I'm buying into the name brand a little bit too much, but
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm trying to look up his contract, if you want to
I just looked at it. It's so if they cut him this year, the dead money is about 16 million on an $11 million deal. But next year, if they cut him, he's scheduled to make I think it was 12 million with 12.55 million with only a dead cap of 5 million. So there's a lot of incentive to move on from him.
Yeah.
And there would be incentive if a team made a trade for him that, get it through for the year. And then if he doesn't pan out, we let him go and we recoup 7.55 in cap.
I like that. I like that a lot. I can't say I
like
hate
you.
it. Okay. All right, Richie, we have talked our ears off for 25 minutes here. What have you learned today? I've learned that Kyler and Budda are coming back with different aura around the team. I've learned that they should trade Marquise Brown if the price is right, and then they should just trade Zach Ertz if there's a price at all. I really like the direction of this team moving forward. I know they're 1-5. I know they get a lot of slander, but the building blocks are there, and I'm confident in guys like Jonathan Gannon and Monty Austin Fort. I don't know why I slurred my speech here. Monty Austin Fort to kind of help right the ship and back in the right direction.
I think that's pretty much fair, Donnie. I don't know if there's too much to really delve into. I don't think this is a super deep podcast. There's no underlying meaning. So if your English teacher is asking you, what's the semblance of Donnie Druin wearing 2 caps, Richie Bradshaw normally wears his hat forward. Why is he wearing it backwards today? It's not that deep. Okay. This podcast is not that deep. So very, very surface level conversation. I think we did a good job just, talking about it. Yeah,
2 white dudes on a podcast, something everybody wants to see.
That's the new name of the podcast. 2 white dudes on a podcast.
Well, until next time, thank you so much for tuning in to another edition of the All Cardinals podcast. Hats off to Richie, where you can find him on Twitter at RichieBrads36. Follow me on Twitter at Donnie Druin, and stay up to date on everything Arizona Cardinals. And for more news, analysis, insight, more on your favorite teams, visit allcardinals.com or site.com/Cardinals. Richie, peace out.